Well, everyone, let's go ahead and talk about the iPad Pro 4th generation or the 2nd generation, depending on which way you look at it, and see how they hold up in 2022. Now, these iPads are actually very interesting, and since, basically the whole entire last year, they were still very relevant, and up until last year, they were the best selling, they were the highest end iPad Pro Apple was selling, but then Apple released the M1 iPads, and this year they released the M1 iPad Air. And there's been so much controversy around iPadOS 16, which directly relate to these iPads, which is very interesting, which these are the last generation iPad Pros Apple sold. Now, starting off, if you want to pick them up, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, help support the channel at the same time. But what's very interesting about both the 11-inch and the 12.9-inch iPads is the controversy behind them, but we'll get into that in a second. First of all, with the bodies, these two iPads came in two different sizes, just like the current iPad Pros. They came in an 11-inch model and then the 12.9-inch model. Realistically, they kind of have the exact same thing going on between them. So there really isn't like features that are supported on one iPad that aren't supported on the other one. The M1 iPads is a little bit different, but with these iPads, the 11-inch model has, an 11-inch screen. ProMotion, True Tone looks beautiful. The 12.9-inch one also has pretty much the same exact thing going on for it as well. They both have USB Type-C ports on the bottom. These aren't Thunderbolt ports like we do have on the M1 iPads, but I still think these look very, very good, and I have very few things to complain about them in that standpoint. Now on the back, first of all, the sides are still very premium, and the design is still the exact same thing as the current iPads, and I don't really know what Apple's going to be doing to differentiate these iPads and the, latest M1 ones. I don't think they're going to be doing anything for the most part. I think maybe they could slim down the bezels, maybe improve the camera, but other than that, I think it's going to be roughly around the same exact thing as the, previous generation, to be honest. Now we do have the beautiful camera setup on the back as well, which I actually do like. You have a 12 megapixel wide and then a 10 megapixel ultra wide sensor. So it's almost like an iPhone 11 camera. You do have a LiDAR sensor on these things, which is very interesting. I don't know if these are, the most, the first cameras you should go and pick up, in my opinion. Like if you have an iPhone 11 or newer, those are going to be giving you a little bit of a better experience overall, just because those are the more premium cameras. I think that's probably the best way I can put it. That's not to say that the iPhone, these iPad cameras are not good. I think these are really, really good still. But if you're trying to go ahead and film videos, at a higher resolution than 4K at 60, again, you're not going to be getting that on any of the latest iPhones, but you do have a lot more capability on those latest iPhones. You have 4K at 60 on the front too, which is really nice. So it may make a little bit more sense to go ahead and pick up something like an iPhone 11 if you want to go for the camera standpoint. But the fact that these things have cameras, like I mentioned before, is actually really cool, and I'm definitely a fan of these cameras without a doubt. So in terms of the camera setup, it gets a thumbs up for me in my books. Now, in terms of the storage models, they do go up to 1 terabyte, so that's always a really cool thing. The fact that you can just go and buy this iPad and have it go up to that much storage capacity is really cool, and I've been a fan of that for sure for the last several years that Apple's been making these iPads with 1 terabyte of storage. Now, you do have Apple Pencil 2 support on this iPad as well, and they also work with those Magic Keyboards that Apple makes. So there's a lot of accessories that these specific iPads support. So I will tell you, the fact that this thing has that type of capability right there is really cool as well. Now I do wish this thing had a Thunderbolt port at the bottom. I think that would have been awesome, but again, it's not a deal breaker. But one thing that is very interesting between these is actually with the software versions. Now, one thing that Apple's kind of done, recently is really, really differentiate every single, iOS, iPadOS model of device with every single version of software. And what I mean by that is essentially with the iPhones, every single version year release of iPhones, Apple has kind of taken a weirder and weirder approach and has substantially reduced features and has substantially, I think, reduced performance on each individual iPhone on each individual version of iOS. Now, this also cycles down to iPadOS. On iPadOS 16, Apple has substantially reduced the amount of features on pretty much all the amount of iPads that are supported. This is more so involved with the M1 iPad and the A series of iPads. These iPad Pros, the 4th generation and 2nd generation, whatever you're going to call it, they have the A12Z chip inside. Now, that isn't a super old chipset. And when you think about it, this thing just came out in 2020. So the fact that this thing is actually at that level is actually very weird because it came out in 2020. The A12 chip is like a 2018, chipset. So even at that time, it was 2 years old. Now it's approaching 4 years old, and Apple just stopped selling this thing last year. So they were selling an outdated chipset. Now it is a variation chip. It's like the A12Z, but it's very weird that Apple did that. That's number one. Another thing is that most of the time when they release an iPad, yeah, sometimes they may have a variation chipset like this one, but they still give it all the features. They still treat it as if it was like a 2020, chipset. They did not do that this time around. The M1 iPad actually ended up getting way more features, especially that new Stage Manager feature within iPadOS 16. The A series of chipsets from iPad did not support that. Only the M1 ones did. And I think that's very weird. For Apple to do something like that is very, very strange. They typically don't do something like that. They typically don't do things like this at this level so soon with all their devices. But this is the first time I've seen them drop support of a ton of different devices across the board. They kept all the iPads, which is very interesting for the most part. They did drop the Mini 4 and the Air 2. They dropped a bunch of MacBooks, and they reduced the amount of features all these devices were getting. I think that in and of itself was very, very strange. Now, this does kind of lead me into the performance segment. I think this iPad is still a very good performing iPad for sure. You can spec out the RAM to, different variations if you want to, but the fact that this thing is still at the level that it is, I think this is a really good performing iPad for sure. Whether you get the 11-inch one or the 12.9-inch one, this is still a killer iPad in terms of performance. Now, if you're a student and you want to get an iPad instead of a MacBook, I think this is what Apple's trying to do. They're trying to get people to use an iPad instead of a MacBook. That way they get that and they're like, oh, it's not good enough, then they get a MacBook anyway, then they have both. I will tell you, MacBooks are always going to be better in my opinion than iPads. However, if you're a student and you don't think you're going to be using any type of crazy, chipset, if you don't think you're going to be using anything crazy within an iPad or whatever the case is, it may make more sense if you go ahead and buy something like an iPad because it is substantially cheaper, especially these things you can buy in the used market. But I would always recommend going for a MacBook, and they're pretty cheap nowadays in the used market as well. I still think though, if you're doing anything beyond, taking notes and everything like that, getting a MacBook is going to be the better way to go. But these iPads still perform very well. Gaming, video editing, all those types of things, even on iPadOS 16, it's still going to be performing very, very well on this next version of software. Of course, it's a limiting features, but I still think this is a very good performing iPad when it comes down to it. So, in my opinion, I think these iPads are still completely worth it, and I still think they have a lot of capability within it. They support all the Apple Pencils, they support all those accessories like the Magic Keyboards, they have a great camera setup, they can go up to 1 terabyte, they have the A12Z chip, they can have a beautiful display, they have a lot of different stuff going for them. The only issue I have is the future of this iPad. The fact that Apple's kind of shown their colors and has kind of showcased to us, okay, well, these iPads, with the M series are going to be more important. It may make a little bit more sense if you go and buy something like an M series of chipset, even like the iPad Air 5, that may make a little bit more sense in my opinion, just because that actually has a little bit more of a future ahead of it. With these ones, it's a little tough. I wish these things could last forever. It doesn't look like they're going to be lasting forever, but that is another thing I've been kind of taking a look at. So I guess we'll see what happens in the future, but in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.